Welcome the anointed ones. Power doesn't announce itself. It shows up, rearranges the room, and leaves everyone arguing about what just happened. Whatever that move was, it didn't trend, it didn't get a press release, and it didn't come with dramatic music playing in the background. Yet the atmosphere shifted, conversations paused, people recalculated. Somewhere between confusion and panic, a quiet understanding settled in. The balance of control had just changed, and not in their favor. Here's a fact most people don't like admitting out loud. In real power shifts, nobody claps. There's no applause when authority changes hands. There's silence, side eyes, and a sudden increase in "let me get back to you." That's because power isn't emotional, it's logistical. It shows up in who now hesitates before speaking, who suddenly needs permission, and who starts pretending they always supported you anyway. Funny how that works. What made your move different wasn't aggression, volume, or theatrics. It was timing and finality. You didn't test the waters, you changed the temperature. And once that happens, people don't debate whether you're in charge. They debate how they're supposed to behave now that you are. That's when the whispers start. That's when everyone magically becomes a strategist overnight, replaying your move like it's a leaked security tape they can't quite explain. There's also something slightly hilarious about watching grown adults panic quietly. Nobody screams. Nobody flips tables. Instead, they smile a little too hard, laugh a little too late, and suddenly remember appointments they don't actually have. That's not coincidence, that's recalibration. Humor aside, those reactions are data. They tell you exactly who benefited from the old arrangement and who's nervous about the new one. This isn't about dominance or ego. It's about the moment when restraint stops being interpreted as weakness and starts being recognized as a choice. Your move didn't add power to you, it exposed where it already was. And once people see that, they can't unsee it. The room knows, the hierarchy knows, even the ones pretending not to notice know. And that's where this story really begins, right after the move, when everyone realizes the game didn't end. It just changed owners. Number one, you broke the unspoken contract they thought you'd always honor. There was an agreement in place long before anyone said a word about it. Not written, not signed, not even openly acknowledged. It lived in patterns, routines, and expectations. They believed you would always respond a certain way, that you would explain yourself, that you would tolerate small disrespect for the sake of peace, that you would keep absorbing pressure without ever flipping the table. And because you kept doing that for a while, they confused your patience for permanence. That unspoken contract is what gave them comfort. It allowed people to plan around you, lean on you, push limits, and feel safe doing it. Not because they were stronger, but because they thought you were predictable. Predictability is easy to manage. Predictability is easy to exploit. And most people don't realize how much of their confidence comes from assuming you'll stay the same. Then you didn't. The move didn't just surprise them. It invalidated their entire operating system. Suddenly, all their past calculations were useless. The rules they were playing by no longer applied, and the worst part for them was this: they couldn't argue with it. You didn't violate a rule they could point to. You violated an assumption they never should have relied on in the first place. That's why the reaction wasn't loud. It was internal. Confusion showed up first, then fear, then a strange kind of respect they'd never offered before. People hate admitting they built comfort on someone else's restraint. When that restraint disappears, it forces an uncomfortable truth to the surface. You were never obligated to play that role for them. Breaking that contract didn't make you reckless, it made you real. It showed that your cooperation was conditional, not guaranteed. And once people understand that access to you is a privilege and not a default setting, everything shifts. How they speak to you changes. How they approach you changes. How much they test you changes. They're not mad because you were wrong. They're unsettled because the version of you they relied on no longer exists. And deep down, they know they should have never assumed it would last. Number 2, you forced everyone to update their internal map of you. People operate on mental maps of the world, and that includes maps of each person they interact with. They assign labels, expectations, and boundaries, often without realizing it. They keep track of how far they can push, when to speak, when to stay quiet, and how much risk they can take around you. They plan their moves based on patterns they've observed. That's how control works. Subtle, invisible, and almost invisible until it's gone. Then your move happened. Suddenly, the map they relied on didn't match reality anymore. All those little assumptions they made about your limits, your patience, your reactions, collapsed at once. People don't like updating their internal maps. It's exhausting and uncomfortable. It forces them to admit that they were wrong, that their confidence was built on incomplete or false information. And no one likes being wrong about someone they thought they had figured out. The beauty of this is that it creates hesitation. Hesitation in the people around you is like adding friction to their engine. Every decision slows down. Every plan they had in motion has to be reconsidered. The more people hesitate, the more influence you hold without saying a word. Your move didn't just shift perception, it rewired the way they interact with you entirely. What's fascinating is that the shift is both immediate and permanent. Once someone's internal map has been updated, there's no going back to the version that felt safe for them. They now see you as someone who operates on your own terms, and that knowledge reshapes every interaction. Respect, fear, curiosity, or caution, they all rise naturally from that updated map because people instinctively adjust to reality when they can't rely on assumptions anymore. By forcing this recalibration, you created a quiet form of authority. No threats, no speeches, no demonstrations. Just an undeniable truth. You are not who they thought you were. And now they have to navigate the world knowing that. That is how you become the one in charge, silently yet unmistakably. Number 3, you demonstrated consequence without negotiation. Most people confuse power with persuasion, but true authority doesn't ask, it acts. That move you made didn't come with explanations, debates, or attempts to justify yourself. It wasn't packaged in charm or diluted with compromise. It landed, and it landed with clarity. People noticed immediately, not because it was loud, but because it carried weight. Consequence was built into the action itself, and everyone in the room understood it without a single word. This is what sets control apart from influence. Influence can be negotiated, bargained, or ignored. Consequence cannot. When your move occurred, it didn't leave room for reinterpretation. There was no gray area. It wasn't open to discussion. That level of decisiveness forces people to recognize a boundary they didn't even know existed. It's terrifying for those who have built their strategies around testing limits, pushing buttons, and walking the edge of tolerance. They suddenly realize they no longer know where that edge is. The subtle brilliance is in how quietly it asserts dominance. There's no spectacle, no performance, just an action that recalibrates the way everyone approaches you. Every interaction after that becomes a negotiation in which your terms are unspoken but understood. People stop trying to maneuver around you because they've already experienced the cost of misreading your limits. That is the kind of authority that sticks, the kind that doesn't fade when you leave the room. What makes it even more striking is how it flips expectations. Those who thought they could manipulate, pressure, or charm their way into advantage realize none of that works anymore. The rules of engagement have changed and you set them. That move didn't just deliver a result, it delivered a lesson. Your presence alone now carries accountability. In that moment, People begin to measure every step they take, every word they speak, every action they consider. You didn't raise your voice, demand loyalty, or explain your reasoning. You simply showed that actions have meaning and consequences, and in doing so, you established a level of command that no negotiation could undermine. Number 4, you exposed who was only brave when you were compliant. Courage is a funny thing. Most people think it's measured by loud statements, bold gestures, or visible defiance. But the kind of bravery that matters is tested quietly, in the shadows, against someone who won't tolerate games. That's exactly what your move revealed. It didn't create enemies. It unveiled the ones who were only ever bold because they assumed you would stay in your place. The moment you stepped out of that expectation, their confidence evaporated. These are the people who thrived on your restraint. They pushed, prodded, and tested limits, all under the comfortable illusion that you were predictable. Their actions were never about skill, integrity, or strategy. They were about exploiting what they thought was your weakness. You never owed them predictability, but you gave it. They mistook your discipline for vulnerability, your patience for compliance, your tolerance for passivity. When you acted, it forced a reckoning. The same individuals who walked confidently around you suddenly hesitated, faltered, and recalculated. Their courage had conditions, and those conditions were shattered. That's why you could almost see the internal panic. They were forced to confront a stark truth. The safety net they relied on, the version of you that could be managed, nudged, or manipulated, was gone. And the most striking part of this exposure is how silent it is. You didn't call them out. You didn't announce their inadequacy. You simply acted. Their reactions, hesitation, avoidance, overcompensation, did all the work. You became the mirror, reflecting the reality they didn't want to face. Their bravery was conditional, and it only existed because they assumed they controlled the circumstances. This revelation changes the balance of power instantly. The ones who once felt untouchable are now cautious. The ones who counted on your restraint to maintain their advantage are now navigating uncertainty. In one decisive act, you showed that real strength doesn't just create opportunity for yourself. It exposes the weaknesses of everyone who tried to measure themselves against you. And when that happens, respect, fear, and recalculated strategy quietly take its place. Number 5, you changed the cost of testing you. Before that move, people treated you like a negotiable variable, like someone whose patience or limits could be measured and manipulated. They pushed boundaries because they believed the risk was low and the payoff was high. They didn't think much about what might happen if they miscalculated, because they assumed the consequences would be manageable. They were operating on outdated math, and your actions rewrote the equation. That move didn't just assert authority, it recalibrated the cost of every action directed at you. Suddenly, what once felt safe became risky. Every word, every gesture, every attempt to test your patience carried a weight they hadn't considered. They realized that they could no longer operate on assumptions, because now the potential penalty was unpredictable. Uncertainty is a quiet kind of power, one that slows people down and forces them to think twice. The brilliance of this isn't in intimidation, it's in clarity. You didn't need to threaten or dramatize. The consequence was implicit in what you did. Your move signaled, without speaking, that the old rules no longer applied. Testing you is no longer a casual experiment. It has real stakes, and everyone around you understood it. That creates a subtle shift. Hesitation becomes the default. People stop pushing because the risk is unknown, and the unknown is more dangerous than any obvious obstacle. What makes this particularly powerful is that it's permanent. Once someone experiences a misstep with consequences they didn't expect, their internal calculations change forever. They remember that moment every time they consider pressing against you. They start measuring their actions, weighing your reaction, and questioning whether the behavior they once relied on will still work. By changing the cost of testing you, you didn't just protect yourself. You established a boundary that can't be ignored. People learn the hard way that approaching you carelessly has consequences. You became someone to be considered seriously, someone whose limits aren't suggestions, they're rules. And in that moment, without raising your voice or demanding respect, you quietly became the one in charge. Number 6, you removed the illusion that power had to be earned gradually. Most people are conditioned to think that influence, authority, and respect come slowly, like climbing a ladder rung by rung, waiting for permission, or proving themselves over years. They believe that power is a process, that it can only be achieved by patiently following rules, staying in line and earning it piece by piece. That belief gives them comfort because it implies that power is predictable, controllable, and fair. They assume that unless someone pays their dues, they can't possibly hold real authority. Then you made the move that shattered that illusion completely. You didn't ask for approval, wait for consensus, or follow their timeline. You acted decisively, and suddenly the rules everyone relied on didn't matter. The idea that influence had to be earned gradually was exposed as a myth. Real authority doesn't always come with a ceremony or a slow build. It comes when someone acts with clarity, purpose, and timing. It comes when a single move forces others to adjust to them. That's not just power, that's recognition. What makes this so destabilizing for people around you is how unpredictable it feels. They've been trained to measure authority by procedure and patience. When you bypass that entirely, you create uncertainty, and uncertainty makes people cautious. They can no longer assume control based on tradition, seniority, or incremental steps because you just rewrote the game in a single moment. Suddenly, influence exists where it didn't before, simply because you decided it did. The psychological impact is enormous. People begin to realize that they underestimated you, misread you, and relied on outdated assumptions. Those who once planned their moves carefully around what they thought was a slow, predictable rise to power now see that authority can appear instantly, that awareness commands attention, respect, and sometimes even fear, not because you demanded it, but because you demonstrated it. By removing the illusion that power is earned gradually, you didn't just shift the rules. You became a living example that control isn't given, it's seized. And once people witness that, the room will never look at you the same way again. Number 7. You proved you were willing to be misunderstood, to be effective. One of the most overlooked aspects of real power is the willingness to act even when others don't fully understand you. Most people spend their energy trying to be liked, to make sure everyone around them sees their intentions clearly, or to explain themselves in ways that prevent criticism. That's exhausting and, honestly, overrated. You proved that effectiveness doesn't come from being universally understood. It comes from being decisive, even when your moves confuse, shock, or irritate people. The move you made wasn't about clarity for comfort. It was about clarity for results. People didn't immediately get it, and some may have judged you harshly or misread your intentions. That's exactly the point. Being misunderstood temporarily is a price few are willing to pay, but it's a price that distinguishes someone in charge from someone who follows. You demonstrated that your priorities are aligned with outcomes, not opinions, and that kind of decisiveness makes others recalibrate how they see you instantly. The brilliance of this lies in the ripple effect. When people misinterpret your actions, they try to figure out your next step, and they pay attention. They analyze your behavior, second-guess their assumptions, and start considering that there may be a strategy they're too inexperienced to comprehend. That uncertainty elevates your presence without a single word spoken. It forces the room to adapt to you rather than the other way around. Being misunderstood also forces a type of respect that is earned silently. People realize that the results matter more than the narrative, that following your lead has consequences for them, whether they understand it or not. And in that gap between misunderstanding and recognition, authority grows. Your move created tension, curiosity, and recalibration simultaneously, and that is a sign of someone who is no longer playing by the rules others set. By showing you were willing to be misunderstood to be effective, you revealed a fundamental truth. Leadership is not about consensus, approval, or even clarity. It's about the courage to act decisively in a way that shifts everything, regardless of who fully gets it. And that is how you become the one everyone unconsciously adjusts to. Number 8, you made neutrality impossible. Before your move, people could hover in the gray areas, pretending they didn't have to take a stance. They could stay comfortable, say nothing, and let the world and you play out around them while they stayed safely on the sidelines. That's how most people operate, quietly observing, quietly calculating, quietly hoping the storm passes without touching them. But your move eliminated that comfort entirely. Neutrality ceased to exist because your action demanded acknowledgement, attention, and response. Suddenly, everyone had to pick a side, whether they wanted to or not. What makes this so powerful is that neutrality is often the silent weapon of control. People use it to manipulate, delay, or hide their intentions. By refusing to allow that, you forced everyone to confront reality directly. They could no longer act like they didn't care or pretend their opinion didn't matter. The space where ambiguity once protected them disappeared, replaced by a clear, undeniable truth. The game has changed, and they are now participants, not spectators. This shift creates tension, and tension is a form of leverage. When neutrality is impossible, hesitation grows. People start measuring every word, every move, and every glance because there is now accountability in action and in inaction. Suddenly, silence isn't safety, it's exposure. Those who thought they could coast without consequence are forced to reckon with the fact that every decision or failure to decide now has weight. The brilliance of making neutrality impossible is subtle but devastating. You didn't have to dominate verbally or physically. You didn't have to explain yourself or demand allegiance. Your single move reframed the room, recalibrating relationships, influence, and strategy. People are compelled to align, oppose, or retreat, and all of these choices serve to solidify your position. By removing the option to stay neutral, you forced clarity where ambiguity once reigned. You made everyone acknowledge your authority, consciously or unconsciously, and in doing so, you established a power that doesn't rely on consent. It relies on reality. In that moment, the rules changed, and everyone knew it. Number 9, you signaled that your decisions are internally sourced. People underestimate how unsettling it is when someone acts from a place no one can predict or control. Most individuals operate under the assumption that people are influenced, manipulated, or guided by external pressures, approval, fear, loyalty, or the need to fit in. They believe that if they apply the right pressure or appeal to the right motivations, they can steer outcomes. Your move destroyed that assumption entirely. By acting decisively and unapologetically, you signaled that your decisions come from within, from your own judgment, priorities, and principles, and not from the influence or expectations of others. That realization hits harder than confrontation. When people understand that your actions are self-directed, their usual levers of control disappear. They can no longer anticipate your moves because you don't operate on the same input-output system they expect. This creates uncertainty, hesitation, and a subtle recalibration of their own behavior. Suddenly, they are forced to pay attention to you as a sovereign actor, someone whose decisions are not negotiable or subject to manipulation. The power of being internally sourced lies in the clarity it provides you while simultaneously destabilizing everyone else. You are untethered from their expectations, free to act in alignment with your objectives rather than their approval. They begin to notice patterns that aren't patterns at all, actions driven not by routine or convention, but by intention. That unpredictability is not chaos, it's authority. They see that trying to influence or anticipate you is pointless, because you measure success by your own standard, not by their comfort or their narratives. The ripple effect is immediate. People start treating you differently without knowing exactly why. They pause before acting around you, weighing consequences they can't fully calculate. They start giving space, respect, or cautious alignment because they recognize that your decisions are self-contained, deliberate, and consequential. In a single move, you didn't just assert yourself. You rewired how everyone else approaches you. Being internally sourced is silent dominance. It communicates one truth louder than words ever could. You answer to no one but yourself, and that changes everything. Number 10, you force the room to recalibrate its power centers. Power is rarely static. It moves quietly, shifts subtly, and reveals itself in who people check with, who they defer to, and who they avoid. Most of the time, people don't notice the patterns. They just follow them. There are invisible hierarchies, unspoken alliances, and chains of influence that dictate how decisions are made and who gets listened to. Your move changed all of that instantly. Suddenly, the old power centers no longer applied. Conversations paused, authority lines blurred. People who once assumed control realized they were operating on outdated assumptions, and those assumptions cost them confidence. The recalibration isn't something that happens with fanfare. It's not a fight or a dramatic confrontation. It's quiet, almost imperceptible, yet unmistakable. The ones who relied on influence to maintain their position start second-guessing themselves. Gatekeepers, strategists, and manipulators, all of them begin to rethink their moves. Every action is measured against a new standard. How does this work with you now? Who holds sway, and where do I stand? In that moment, the entire room becomes a live experiment in uncertainty, and you are the variable everyone is trying to understand. What's remarkable is how this shift solidifies your presence without needing to declare it. By acting decisively, you effectively rewrote the map of authority. People start seeking your approval, anticipating your reactions, or adjusting their behavior just to avoid missteps. Even those who resist alignment can't ignore the new configuration. They are now forced to operate under rules they didn't set. This is the quiet, undeniable form of control. It doesn't scream, it doesn't demand attention, but it forces recognition. Recalibrating the power centers doesn't just put you in charge of a moment. It subtly reshapes all future interactions. From that point forward, everyone has to navigate around you. Your presence is no longer just part of the room. It defines how the room functions. In that single move, you didn't just assert authority. You became the reference point that everyone else must adjust to, whether they admit it or not. Number 11, you showed that restraint was a choice, not a limitation. For most people, patience and restraint are misunderstood as weakness. They see someone holding back and assume they're incapable of acting, unwilling to take risks, or simply ineffective. That assumption gives others a sense of superiority. They push, they test, and they exploit, confident that the limits they perceive are fixed. Your move shattered that illusion. You didn't just act. You revealed that every moment of restraint before had been intentional, a calculated choice, not a reflection of inability. That distinction is powerful, and it unsettles people more than any confrontation ever could. The realization hits quietly but deeply. Those who once counted on your patience to maintain their advantage now understand that it wasn't a limitation. They were simply waiting for the right moment, for the right calculation. They misread discipline for weakness and tolerance for complacency. By acting decisively, you revealed that restraint can be strategic, and strategy is a form of hidden power. It's the kind of power that is underestimated until it's revealed. And by the time people see it, it's too late to adjust. What makes this revelation so potent is the psychological shift it forces. People realize they've misjudged you for months, maybe years. Their assumptions, their testing, their subtle manipulations, all of it was based on a false premise. That creates a mix of fear, respect, and recalibration. They now see that your patience wasn't passive. It was selective, deliberate, and measured. It wasn't an absence of action. It was an accumulation of intent. This insight changes the balance of power quietly but irrevocably. When restraint is understood as choice, not limitation, it commands respect without explanation. People begin approaching you differently, measuring their actions, and reconsidering their assumptions about how far they can go. What you revealed is simple but profound. Being calm, patient, or measured isn't a lack of power. It's the most intelligent deployment of it. And when people realize that, they start treating you as the one in control, whether you speak a word or remain completely silent. Number 12. You made history, not noise. Most people mistake action for impact. They believe that being seen, heard, or noticed is enough to matter. Loud gestures, constant explanations, and visible displays might grab attention, but they rarely leave a mark that lasts. Your move was different. It wasn't about performance or applause. It didn't need validation, commentary, or approval. It created a reference point, a moment that changes how people perceive reality. That's the difference between making noise and making history. Noise fades, history lingers. What makes history-making moves so potent is their permanence. People replay them in their minds, discuss them in whispers, and measure their own choices against them. Your action became a benchmark. Before this, things were one way. After this, everything shifted. It doesn't matter whether people understand the strategy fully, agree with it, or like it. They remember it. That kind of mark is unshakable because it exists in the collective memory of those who experienced it. Unlike noise, which disappears once the moment passes, history carries authority. Your move wasn't temporary. It rewrote expectations, relationships, and influence in a way that resonates far beyond the instant it happened. Another reason this is so powerful is the subtlety with which it asserts dominance. You didn't need to explain. You didn't need validation. You simply acted, and the ripple effect was unavoidable. People start treating you differently without being told. Decisions are reconsidered. Conversations are approached with caution. Strategy is recalculated. Your presence alone becomes a marker of change because history has already been set in motion. By making history instead of noise, you positioned yourself above reaction and debate. You became the moment people refer to when discussing authority, judgment, or consequences. Your move is no longer just an event. It's a reference, a standard, and a warning. That is how someone goes from being noticed to being remembered, from being part of the conversation to defining it. You didn't just act. You created a lasting impact that no one can ignore, rewrite, or erase. Number 13, you removed the safety of plausible deniability. Plausible deniability is a quiet comfort for many. It allows people to act carelessly, speak freely, and test boundaries without taking responsibility. They rely on ambiguity to shield themselves. pretending they never meant anything or that the outcome wasn't their fault. That invisible safety net gives them confidence, even arrogance. Your move tore that net away. From that moment, no one could hide behind uncertainty or shrug off accountability. Everything became clear. Every action, every intention, every miscalculation carried weight. The impact is immediate and unavoidable. Those who once assumed they could manipulate situations under the cover of ambiguity are suddenly exposed. They realize that the days of gray zones no longer exist when dealing with you. You set a standard where ambiguity no longer protects them. Their attempts to obscure motives, evade responsibility, or manipulate outcomes now hit a hard boundary, and they have no choice but to confront the reality you established. This is more powerful than any confrontation because it forces internal reckoning. People begin to measure every word, every gesture, and every action, knowing that there is no escaping consequence. The absence of plausible deniability creates a psychological shift. Hesitation replaces recklessness, observation replaces assumptions, and respect, or fear, replaces entitlement. In essence, the move you made redefined the rules without needing an explanation or debate. The brilliance lies in how subtly it changes behavior. You didn't have to call anyone out or enforce punishment. By removing the safety net, you forced everyone to operate with awareness and accountability. Their previous strategies, casual manipulations, and comfort zones no longer work because you made them fully visible to consequence. In doing this, you claimed authority not through aggression or noise, but through clarity. People can no longer misread you, ignore you, or play games at your expense. You made it impossible to operate without being fully seen and fully responsible, and that shift alone positions you as the one in charge. Number 14. You made it clear that access to you is conditional now. Before that move, people treated your time, attention, and presence like default settings, something they could take for granted. They assumed proximity to you came without effort, respect, or alignment. That assumption gave them comfort, and it allowed them to operate as if your influence was theirs to borrow whenever convenient. Your move changed all of that. You made it unmistakably clear that being near you, being heard by you, or benefiting from your involvement was no longer automatic. It required something, and they could feel the weight of that shift immediately. The power of conditional access is subtle, but overwhelming. When people realize that engagement with you carries requirements, they begin recalculating their behavior. They start considering how they show up, what they say, and whether they have the credibility, respect, or alignment necessary to maintain that connection. Even those who were bold or careless before become cautious, because access now comes at a cost. It's a quiet but undeniable form of control. You didn't need to enforce rules or make speeches. The standards were implicit in the way you acted. This shift has ripple effects. Suddenly, people can't assume influence simply because they've been present or persistent. They understand that proximity alone doesn't guarantee advantage. They begin to work for your recognition, respect, and acknowledgement, rather than taking it for granted. Your move sent a message that your energy, your decisions, and your engagement are valuable commodities, and they must be earned. The brilliance of this is in how it reinforces authority without confrontation. By making access conditional, you created boundaries that force respect, recalibrate expectations, and subtly establish hierarchy. Those who can't meet the unspoken standards step back, while those who align recognize the stakes and adjust accordingly. In one decisive act, you rewrote the rules of interaction. You showed that your presence is not a convenience, it is a privilege, and only those who understand, respect, and adapt to that reality can engage with you fully. That is how someone becomes the undeniable center of control, not through noise or aggression, but by making it unmistakably clear who earns a seat at the table and who does not. The final word, the move that changed everything. When you examine what just happened, it's not just a single act, it's a declaration. Every gesture, every choice, every calculated step you took shattered assumptions, recalibrated perceptions, and rewrote the rules that everyone around you thought were untouchable. You didn't just act, you redefined the environment. You proved that authority isn't something granted, borrowed, or negotiated. It's something seized and quietly enforced, often without a word. From breaking unspoken contracts to eliminating neutrality, from forcing people to update their mental maps of you to showing that restraint is a choice and not a limitation. Every point we've covered leads to the same undeniable truth. You are now operating on a level they cannot predict, manipulate, or ignore. People around you can try to pretend it hasn't happened. They can whisper behind closed doors, scramble to adjust strategies, or cling to old assumptions. But they know the reality. They felt the weight of your move the instant it landed. You demonstrated consequences without negotiation, revealed who was only brave when you were compliant, made ambiguity impossible, and set the cost of testing you higher than ever. You showed that access to you is conditional, your decisions are internally sourced, and your actions leave a permanent mark. These aren't isolated effects. They are the pillars of influence and authority that make you the center of attention, the reference point, and the one everyone now measures themselves against. What makes this extraordinary is that it all happened without shouting, without chaos, and without seeking validation. Power expressed in action, strategy, and intention is far more enduring than anything performative. You didn't just win the moment, you reshaped the rules, and now everyone else must adapt to the new reality. They are recalculating, hesitating, and adjusting, because the move wasn't just effective, it was transformative. So remember this, true authority doesn't demand recognition. It commands it through the shifts it creates. Every choice you make, every boundary you enforce, and every decisive action you take reinforces that position. You didn't just make a move, you became the one in charge, and from this point forward, the world operates differently around you. If this video gave you a new perspective, made you think differently, or opened your eyes to the subtle ways power and influence work, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to like, comment, and share this with someone who needs to see it. Every action matters, and your engagement helps spread these truths further, because knowledge, once shared, becomes influence in its own right. God bless you.